needs to be acted upon. And I'll accept any.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Moved by Jamie and seconded by Ramon. Do we have any comments? Hearing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Great, thank you. Item 3 on our agenda is a report on any submitted public comments for this meeting.
Mr. Chair, we did not receive any comments today.
Thank you. And remind the committee that on our website, we have posted comments from, I believe, November 29th or November 19th, whatever that last meeting in November was. And you can review those, and I encourage you to do that. All right, on to item number 4, which is listed as coordination with the RTA board or technical management committee. And Paki will lead us through this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will just be a brief update on the last RTA board meeting and then an update on the technical management committee, the TMC. So the RTA board met on December 8th, and they reviewed and discussed the progress made in developing a name project list. We went ahead and reported to the board that the schedule is slipping a little bit at this time. However, the CAC is continuing to meet and discuss the submitted projects and are continuing to work toward developing a draft shortlist. So the board agreed that we shifted the milestone from December 8th to their next board meeting, which is January 26th. So that is the new date for the CAC to revise and look at the draft shortlist. And then just, excuse me.
No, it's okay. I just, I might add that we're continuing to hold on to our end of June deadline, July 1st deadline to provide a draft plan to the board.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This slide just shows some of the milestone dates that we're still able to try and achieve even with this shift. So by March of next year, the RTA will develop the final cost estimates for all the name projects. And then by spring or May of next year, the board will finalize all the policy considerations that are required and needed to finalize the draft plan. At that time, the CAC will fine tune the draft plan and include all of those sub elements, carryover projects, all of that information, the budget that's provided by the board. Then, like as Chairman McGovern said, by July 1st, 2023 is still the goal to have the CAC and the TMC review the draft plan and then have the CAC make the recommendation of the initial draft plan. Following that, in August of next year, the RTA board will then review and approve the draft plan for the public review. Our goal is to have public input process between August and October of next year and get all of their feedback. This is per the direction from the RTA board. And then the last quarter of next year, the final plan revisions will be done based on this public feedback. And then the board will then establish an election date and approve for voter consideration. So those are the milestones that we're continuing to follow. But yeah, as far as the RTA board is concerned. Any questions on the board update? And then quickly on the TMC is going to be meeting on Wednesday, the 21st. They have received the refined list that you all received in your packet of 32 projects. And they will be meeting, they're reviewing now, and they'll be meeting and discussing that on Wednesday. So those are the 2 updates. I just wanted to quickly let you know. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Happy.
Sorry, I came in like a minute late. The list that's going to the TMC on Wednesday, is that going to be the list that the CAC submitted or the list that we just got for this meeting? Because those are different lists. They have different projects on them.
The TMC, oh, Mr. Chair and Abby, the TMC is reviewing the list of 32 that you submitted on December 3rd.
Okay, so that's gonna include the sidewalk projects on BYT, on Pasquayaki, and, okay, thanks, Tom.
Good. Any other questions or comments about the TMC or board meetings and coordination? As a reminder, what's going to the TMC is a list of projects that has not been has not been vetted by this committee completely, and certainly that's part of what we want to do today. And so I want to, just keep everyone advised that as much as possible, we want to have a fluid back and forth communication with the TMC. Some of the projects that went to the TMC, as you're aware, require some feedback from them. Things like combining projects into a single corridor project, and a few other issues that are important, I think, including the fact that we didn't have perfect, at least from this person's perspective, we didn't have perfect coverage of the region. And so looking at how we might best do that, it will be helpful, I think, for us to get the opinion of the TMC and as quickly as we can get it, so that we have that while we're debating and deciding on that initial list to give to the board. Which leads us basically into the next item on our agenda.
Hey, Tom, I did have my hand up with a question about the RTA board update, if that's all right to ask.
Yeah, of course. I don't see it up. Are you? Oh, there you are. Okay, sorry.
No worries. Thanks. So I saw the by May 2023, all the items within there. And I know this committee has expressed interest in providing feedback to the board about the budget and with the categories and stuff, and that's been kind of a longstanding agenda item, for at least the last couple of months. Do we have a sense of when we'll have that opportunity to discuss that and provide our feedback to the board before they make that decision in May?
Yeah, my intention is to start talking about that as soon as we have this initial list ready for the board.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Tom.
So I don't see our process as completely linear. In this case, I think it's so important that we get this group of projects together that I don't think it behooves us or the process itself to take on too many of those other issues that are equally important, but don't have the same lead time as this named project portion of the plan do. So any other questions? We have a good turnout today, and so the screen I'm looking at sometimes doesn't show me everyone's name, and if I steamroll you, please speak up. Thanks. Taki.
So this agenda item this will start the refinement process of the list of 32 projects that you received in your packet. I'm not going to pull those up, but what we're going to do is do a tag team approach with team members. We've got Josh Pope here, who's available to pull up the database as needed so that you can ask questions and look at any other projects. And then Jeanette Duren is also joining us she manages the RMAP. So if there's any questions related to that as well, and to help facilitate. So what we want to do is we took some of the questions that were used at the TMC workshop to start the conversation. These questions will be going through each one individually, and we want you to keep in mind that this plan needs the support from all voters across the region. And so when you're considering these questions, we want you to keep that in mind. I'll just briefly read the 3 questions just so you know where we're going with this. And then we'll go through each one individually and start the facilitation process and give you the opportunity to have your discussion and questions. And we'll pull up the information as you need. So the first question is that we want you to really think about is what part of the region is not getting any or not enough of the benefits from the proposed list? In other words, what is missing? The second question is what could be considered as too controversial for regional support? You know, some of the hot buttons that we need to be aware of. And then finally, what projects may not be viewed as regional based on their location or their scope or both of those projects. So these are the questions that we want to help guide you with in the conversation today.
Okay, let me start by asking similar question, and that is of the projects that you see on the 32, what's missing? Bruce.
Yeah, I'd like to, in that context, raise a couple issues. The first for me is that looking at the projects, and I raised this at our last meeting, is to look at sort of the complete corridor concept and really understand how decisions made about that will impact regional mobility. And hopefully we can have a thoughtful discussion about that. The second is this notion that it seems very significant to me that particularly in the southeastern part of the metro area, that some of those projects did not make the top priority list, and yet critically important to that region. The third one is sort of a follow-on to Amanda's, the implication of Boss's suggestion, and that is, I fully understand that we're living within the board's directives and guidance on budget and how we should come up with lists, and I'm not challenging that. But as we move forward, I would hope we would have an opportunity to revisit the other projects and look at putting another second list together that could be considered as part of a recommendation to the board regarding potentially looking at more than a half-cent or sales tax to support transportation. I think when we see that list, the public's going to see how important those projects are to regional mobility and would be open to the notion of a 3/4 or a full cent tax. I realize that's not what we're doing right now, but I would hope in the period of time once we come up with our priority list that we'll have the opportunity to visit that issue and make our advisory recommendations on that basis.
Without realizing it, the $1.1 billion that worth of projects that we will ostensibly forward to the board as our initial draft list. Once better cost estimates are applied to it, will probably be considerably more. And it could very well be that those form kind of the basis for this supplemental list or secondary list that you're suggesting. And I think it's a fine idea and something that we should keep at the front of our mind. As far as the corridors go, I think it would be helpful for Josh to help us with showing those that are currently shown as just segments, Drexel being a great example, and a few others. SR 210 is another of those that shows up as multiple projects that when combined are actually corridor projects. And then finally, and maybe a good place to start now would be a map of the sub areas. That is the areas that we may be able to identify visually as appearing to be under represented on the projects. So we'll do those things. We have 2 other questions from or answers to my question, I guess. I hope from folks online. We'll start with Moss.
Thanks, Tom. Before we dive too far in, I was wondering, could we were there changes to the list that Josh showed us during our December 5th meeting? And the list that was sent to us a couple days ago. Could we talk through what those changes were, or if any were made?
Mr. Chair, Amanda, no, the list that you received, the list of 32 is what we're discussing today. There have been no changes from December 5th. The TMC will be reviewing it on Wednesday, so we don't have their feedback yet.
Oh, okay. Could we, I guess, I'm a little confused then, because I went through and sorted by the 32 that Josh had shown us and had taken a screenshot of that. And I was looking up the IDs in the PDF that we received. And I noticed that there were like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 projects that had been removed. Specifically, there's like 2 for the Pascoyaki tribe, 3 for South Tucson, 2 for Tucson, and then, and 1 Pima County project. And it looks like a couple projects were added to them. So there's like another one for Marana, the Sonoran Corridor, and then 2 Sarita and Oro Valley and projects that were added. So it looked like it changed our total from 1,036,000,000 to 1,160,000,000.
Josh?
Chair, and members of the committee, Moss, I'm not, a lot of information was shared, so I'm not exactly sure where you're coming up with around 8 different projects. The intent of what was shared at last CAC meeting was that initial list of 32 of top CAC priorities that intersected with the TMC workshop priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what you may be looking at, so the list of 32 that has been referenced, that has been distributed, and that is also expressed in the platform as initial CAC list or initial list equals yes. That is where that Venn diagram from the last presentation, where that overlap was. And what we, in observing that overlap, identified 2 jurisdictional partners that had no projects that were in the CAC priority ranks top set and the TMC workshops priority list. So that's where those 2 additional projects, for total of 4 projects for those 2 jurisdictions, were added in.
Okay.
So that may be, I think you may just be looking at
Yeah.
CAC priority rank as opposed to that CAC priority rank as it intersects with the TMC priority workshop.
So I did sort by the priority rank, and I totally get the Oro Valley Sarita ads. I remember that being a part of the discussion. I did not remember part of the discussion for the Tangerine Road in Miranda or the Sonoran Corridor in Pima County. And it looks like, for example, the Palo Verde Road, Bill B, was that modernization project that Pima County was not only, it looks like it was fairly, middle of the pack CAC ranked number 21 or ranked as 21 project, and then also was listed as a CAC or TMC priority. And that looked like it got removed along with some other ones, including ones that were really highly ranked on the CAC priority list. So I was just trying to understand how some of these decisions, and maybe more specifically the Tangerine Road and Sonoran Corridor projects, and the decisions that went to adding those ones in.
Well, the Marana Tangerine Road here.
Yeah. I think that's
TI. Yeah, so that would have shown up in the CAC priority rank in that initial like 1.1 billion of CAC priorities, because that cutoff was right at 35. I believe there are 335 ranked projects. So that actually made it into that kind of top tier of CAC priority ranks. And it was also a TMC priority. So that made it in, along with the other 27 projects. So, and we didn't discuss it, because it met that criteria. What was the second, the Sonoran corridor, was also,
So,
in the CAC priority rank 35, and also met the TMC priority, workshop priority. This number here is it had changed at the workshop, but hasn't changed in the database, because the scope of it changed from building out the project to acquiring the right of way for the project. So hopefully those two questions, those two aspects. Do you have any questions on that?
I guess, yeah, because I'm looking at the original scores priority. And I see, so there were 3 that were ranked as 35. And so my
Right.
understanding when we talked, the cutoff was 32 because there were 3 projects within there. And then it looks like I'm just curious then why the third 35 ranked project, for Pasco Yaqui, wasn't included in this initial list as well then.
That would have been, let me go back and that Venn diagram where we looked at the top performing CAC priority ranks, this list here. The numbers are very similar. When we did a cutoff of 1.1 billion, or as close as possible to that, that cutoff was at 35, and when we did that, we then looked at what of those CAC priority ranks overlap with the TMC priority ranks. And that is what actually gave us 28 projects. And then we had to add those 4 additional ones in to make sure all jurisdictions were represented. So that is why some of the projects that may be performing well in CAC priority rank didn't show up. And I think that maybe some of those 8 that you identified, because they didn't show up in the TMC priority workshop as a TMC priority through that workshop exercise.
So Josh, to clarify, the 35 is based on dollars essentially.
Yes.
So how far down do you have to go on the CAC priority rankings to get to 1.1 billion?
Yeah.
All right, and then on the TMC, you simply overlap and say, remove the no's.
Correct.
And what you're left with is 28 projects. And then 4 more were added that we just discussed.
That's
And that
correct.
makes the 32 that sit there now.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. I guess, I mean, I was not expecting to have it whittled down further for us. But this is a really helpful explanation. So thanks for walking me through that, Josh. But I guess I'm, looking at our guiding principles and everything, I'm concerned that there were projects that were cut that really do align with our guiding principles. And I would be curious to, since this is iterative and we're going through this process and some of the projects are not nearly as expensive as some of the other ones, just like having the space to have that conversation. And as a CAC, because, it's possible that we might be like, hey, this was ranked number 6 by us and our evaluation tool, TMC, we would like to understand why you really don't want to do this project. And if there's a way to have more of that discussion than just automatically removing projects that ranked fairly highly for us and but were eliminated because of that outcome from the TMC meeting a few months ago.
Got it. Understood. And the secondary question to my first one of what's missing is what's there that we don't think should be there. So between those two questions, any of those projects that you feel have been removed that should be added back, or clarification or justification from TMC as to why they shouldn't be there, will definitely be recorded and that information passed on to them. I would like to have that list today of those projects as we go through it, so that we can ask that question specifically to TMC on Wednesday as far as, can you either reconsider or tell us in more detail why these were did not go forward. All right, I've got questions after questions, but I had Mary first, and then I'll have Abby, Jamie, and Chris, I think. Oh, and sorry, Dale, and then Chris. Forget about it. I'm just gonna start calling on people. Mary, your turn. Are you there, Mary? Well, once you get it.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
There you are.
Yeah, sorry, my system is cutting in and out, so I'm getting like every third word.
A little bit louder, please.
Okay, let me see if I can turn my system up here. Hang on, sorry. We're having some scratchy tones here. How about now? Is that better?
Not much. I think Crystal will jack it up as much as possible for us to hear you. So,
Better?
there you go.
Okay, sorry. Technology, who needs it, right? So when you started out the meeting, you asked for our concerns about things that were not on there that we felt were pain points, et cetera. And I know these have already been discussed, but I wanted to just re-emphasize two things. Drexel Road, when we were in the TMC meeting, it was discussed as all of the Drexel Road pieces should be considered cross-jurisdictional. And I noticed that there was one Drexel Road that's down number 39 CAC priority rank. So I just wanted to underline that Drexel Road, I feel, needs to be considered one cross-jurisdictional unit, whereas that last piece of Drexel was left off because it's number 39 for the CAC priority rank. And the other two that I wanted to talk about that are far down on the CAC priority rank, but yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'll get right back to you, but I did want to just ask the question of the rest of the committee. Does anyone object to that thought process that Mary just laid out about Drexel Road? I can't see nodding on line, but I do see a lot of nodding here in the room.
We made that mistake with Houghton.
Yeah, we made, as Jamie says, we made that mistake with Houghton. Let's don't do it again. Okay, very well. Go ahead, Mary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, because I think that's a critical one. Just, yeah. The other ones are the Colossal Cave and Marianne Cleveland Way. I know we've talked about those a little bit in the CAC, but they were very low on the CAC's priority rank. I think listening in the TMC, again, those were discussed as critical to gaining that far east side voter base. I think if we leave those two out, I think we chance losing the far east side, the Vale, and all those people that commute to the east side that use those roads. So I wanted to just bring those out as being important for us to review at some point because they are far down on the CAC list.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and I think that it would be good, I think, to ask the TMC for some feedback on those projects. These are county projects. We've received quite a bit of input from the Southeast Regional Council, as well as some interested entities, including the school district in that area, that sub area. And I think hearing from TMC as well would be helpful to us. in the meantime, I'll ask Josh to set those in a waiting room for us as we discuss.
Hey, Tom.
And then he just had one.
Invent a whole new technology by here.
And Tom, I just had one more general comment, and then
Go
I'll
ahead.
let go of the podium. As I look at the geographic map of the distribution of projects that the CAC that are within those top 38 of the CAC, as a person who's not even close to any of these projects because I live outside of them all, I think what I'm seeing is a lot of blue in the surrounding areas of Tucson, downtown Tucson area. And if I were someone who lived in Marana or Oro Valley, I would kind of look at this and go, well, what's in it for us? So just general comment that we need to think about these other jurisdictions that really need to see what's in it for me when they go to the voting polls.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Abby.
And the line.
Okay,
Jamie, I think it was you.
Chris is next, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, my comment is a process one in that just a reminder to everybody, and Moss said this a couple times, and I just want to remind, we are the committee. No decisions have been made at all. Staff is doing a great job of supporting and trying to organize the data that we have with regard to what projects might be in or out. But the real work that we have to do is identifying the CAC draft list of projects that are in. That decisions may be made by staff with the best information that they have in terms of here's where we draw the line, but nothing has been cut. And we all should remember that none of this, no project has been cut. The chair opening the discussion with regard to what are we doing, what projects should be in, what projects shouldn't be in, that's the heart and meat of our work. And so there's probably a list that we should start generating that is the CAC draft list that we chew on, that we identify. There's an absolute consensus that these list of projects absolutely should be in the draft. What we have right now is drafts that the staff has produced based upon the scoring projects, the scoring effort that we've done, but no decisions have been made. I just want to make sure that everybody remembers that the real meat of our work is consensus projects that absolutely should be in. And then on the margins is where people identify a gap, they propose the project, we debate it, and we add or we don't. That's the heart of our work as I see it. So I applaud the regional sort of, the filters that we have to apply are our guiding principles in regionalism. And every project that we consider should be through those filters. So that was going to be my only comment. Thanks.
Wow, I wasted my time trying to explain that. I should have just called on Chris to start with. Thanks, Chris. That was well put. Jamie is our next.
Oh, okay, so I have a question first, and I know the gentleman from Tucson was here. A lot of these projects are modernized. What consists of modernization? Is that mainly the bus pullouts and sidewalks
Maybe we could.
and bicycle?
Yeah, maybe we could ask Rick to remind us of the differences among functionalization,
That's part of these
modernization.
projects are modernizations.
I grabbed every stack of paper I had. I think that's the only one I didn't bring is the definitions
I
of
think
that.
there were only actually 4 projects that I counted. There are 6 specific projects, but some of them are part A and part B of the single corridor
That's probably
that
not-
are
I forgot what that meant, so.
General, a modernization or an operator type of project like that. The through lanes, the existing capacity is adequate. What you need are the operational improvements for turning lanes, as well as all the fully functional aspect for bus pullouts, bike lanes, pedestrian facilities, all that type of aspect. So it's making sure that the full functional integrity of that particular roadway segment or corridor is now fulfilled. The capacity of the lane for the vehicular use, though, is probably adequate. Does that
And
get what you're talking about?
modernization? What's that?
Under
You're
that's under the
describing
modernization.
modernization? Well, then, functionalization is simply adding one element or two to an existing project, so.
I
it
think they're
may-
interchangeable. So for folks that, if I remember right, refer to it as modernizing, we kind of used the functional, we've been using and sticking with that definition.
All
So
right, so
essentially,
the-
they're interchangeable.
So just for everybody's memory, the vast majority of the projects that we have on our list are those functional or modernization.
So it's going to be safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. You won't have congestion with the bus, right? May reduce congestion, but it's not increasing any capacity. Basically is what.
Not increasing the vehicular capacity. It's saying that that particular travel demand mode of vehicular is adequate with its lane configuration. There may be some operational minor turning lanes, central limitations, restrictions if that's needed, but you're essentially making sure that the rest of the components, the rest of the functional modes now can be incorporated and made up for so that they're going to function well.
Okay, thanks.
And also drainage is typically folded in there as well. So if there's drainage issues, that was wrapped underneath that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that question up. That was great, good timing on that question.
So
too, for
to get back to your questions, though, I look at the map and there's nothing in the southeast. I mean, nothing. I was just telling Farhad, like, when I moved out there 9 years ago, 20 miles, 20 minutes to get downtown. Now it's 20 miles, 40 minutes. Congestion is just the population out there. I know in the Vail area, they're adding 23%, I think has been population growth. That PAG has done statistics for Rincon Valley. So I know the county has a lot of pushing a lot of stuff out there, the regional park, U of A Tech Park, talk about, economic development. Just driving around there, there's two new big apartment complexes, 5,400 acre housing development. And to do nothing out there seems silly. I know sort of the Sonoran corridor is there, but that means they're gonna buy property for the next 25 years. That's not gonna do anything for traffic and congestion. And I gotta tell you, I'd be embarrassed to go back to any meetings in Vail if we don't have something. There's a couple big things. I'll talk to it again. I mean, Houghton eventually will be all the way from basically I-10 to Tanque Verde, but again, the whole Corona de Tucson becomes an island when there's a rain event, and that's a problem. If we go back to our guiding principle of safety, we can't get there. The fire department can't get there, so that needs to happen. Again, the Colossal Cave is just atrocious. With the trains, 70 trains a day, impacts a number of schools, obviously impacts police and fire response as well. So if we can't do something there, and then again, freeway, but I mean, that's a PAG problem and a ADOT problem, I guess. So, but I mean, there's just no other alternate routes. So I think we got to have something's got to be there. There's lots of needs out there. And personally, if you look at the RMAP, with Jeanette, when you look at, I remember looking at it last week, there's a population zone where the population density is going to be the extreme red. I think it's basically downtown Tucson, and then it's going to be on the southeast side about Houghton and Colossal Cave over the next 20 years. So we know it's going to happen. We ought to do something about it. So
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Dab, could be Arlen, could be there's on the call as well. Where are the growth areas projected to be in the next 20 years, next 50 years? And then kind of overlay that with the protected lands, I'm sorry, the conservation lands that have been set aside, by Pima County.
Let's let Arlen take that. I'd be happy to take a stab at it. Arlen, please chime in. As part of the RMAP, the most recent RMAP, adopted RMAP, there is a land use modeling exercise that takes all that information into consideration. And probably 3 Octobers ago now, there was a presentation going into those details of what goes into the land use model. So the concerns and considerations of the adopted conservation land system are already calculated into where we're looking at where growth's going to occur. And what we look at is where do we have entitled land? Basically, where is there a master plan community already approved by the Board of Supervisors or the mayor and council, town councils? So we look at what does that adopted future look like based on the comprehensive and general plans of our member jurisdictions. And through the Population Technical Advisory Committee that is composed of development services and planning level staff from our jurisdictional partners, we step through that exercise to see, well, what's our best expectation of what growth is going to look like, what our region's going to look like in 2045. We start with a projection number from the state that we have some dialogue and we are allowed to give them some feedback on the assumptions that go into that number. But ultimately, it's a county-wide projection from the AOEO, the state demographer. And then we take that and distribute it across the region by sub-area being the jurisdictional boundaries. And then within each jurisdiction, the governing comp and general plans kind of dictate the distribution as it's evaluated with some accessibility metrics and what might be attractive. So the red heat map was showing new growth that's occurring. So out in the Vail area, there is a decent amount of entitled land that the county has supported and went through their public engagement processes for the approval of those master plan communities and subdivision plats. And so we look at that's where single family homes can go. We did that there equally for the county. There's growth areas out in SWIP, the Southwest. It's an old planning jargon term, the Southwest area, as well as there is a decent amount of entitled land that builders can buy and start building houses on. And within the city, there was a little bit of a different makeup of what's redevelopable, and looking at some of that kind of that new, more
Upzoning.
recent activity.
Yeah. Upzoning.
Right, high-rise activity that was just starting to occur,
Sure.
but balancing that out with some of that more traditional greenfield development that's taking place in the Houghton area. So there was a fairly extensive exercise in collaborating with our jurisdictional partners who's responsible for managing that entitlement that identified those. I don't have it at my fingertips, but that population growth areas, that informs the travel demand model. So those future congestion values that you see expressed as red, yellow, green in this column here, future roadway congestion is an expression of that growth pattern. The future roadway volumes is an expression of that growth pattern based on our best understanding collectively as a region that we took through that process.
All right. Thanks for nothing.
Welcome. Anytime.
Go ahead, Arlen.
Sure. So for those that don't know, I've been retired for a while, but I was the plan director for the county and involved in Imagine Greater Tucson visioning, as well as a long time population projections and other things with ag and other jurisdictions. So I'm just going to say what Josh said. No, but what Josh said is very, very accurate. I look at this from the perspective of over the next 50 years, what's our projected population, and how much land do we need to get to that population level. And during the visioning program, we were looking at, well, what happens if the population doubles in the county? And for it to double, it's going to be a long time. And that's way past what our 20-year projections are for this particular plan. But the reality is that we may never get to that point from my perspective. We do have land constraints as long as we continue to develop at a relatively low density rate. We have water issues. We can sustain, or at least when those numbers were done, we felt we could sustain from a water perspective a near doubling of the population, provided that agriculture is retired in places as well. And then we looked at the various types of growth areas that we've got. And there's no magic, but when you look at the mountains, when you look at the conservation areas in and around near the mountains and in other areas, you really have very identifiable areas. It's a Vale area, to some extent the southeast. I'll say that, come back for that for a second.
To the southeast.
Southeast, the Swift area, and the continued growth in the northwest area, and infill. The Tucson Mountains aren't going to grow. Oro Valley has limited land to grow into unless it goes into Pinal County, and that's an area outside of our jurisdiction there. But there's a fair amount of growth area with retired agriculture in the Marana area as well, and such. A lot of what is going to happen in the southeast area, my belief is that the amount of private land that's out there is, in other words, not state land in this case, will likely happen first. Some state land will follow, but I think that what we found was that a lot of that state land, I used to work for state land, so please forgive me, past fathers in that area. But a lot of that state land is not going to be necessary for urbanized development if we continue to do what we're doing in the city, which is up planning, up zoning, and creating more density over time, because I think that's in large part what the future will be. Having said that, what we know now is the Vale area is currently growing and growing significantly. Sorry, thought I turned that off. The southwest area will grow. The northwest area will continue to grow. And so from that perspective, those are the areas that we need to concentrate on. I'll stop there because everything else I have to say are specific comments about my opinion about certain areas.
Thank you. I got even more than I was expecting.
Could I piggyback off that real quick? I just had a thought that's relevant.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I did just want to note that was a really helpful overview, Arlen, and thanks, Josh, for pulling these maps up. All that said, part of the, I think one thing I learned in Planning 101 basically was that transportation and land use planning are hand in hand, and they can both be used to shape and manipulate one another, and that drives a lot of this too. And so I think, going back to our guiding principles, where we're concerned about climate change considerations and impacts to our region. And Arlen, you mentioned water concerns and how all of that relates to how we grow and where we invest our infrastructure, including transportation. So I think these are helpful tools to see where, as business as usual continues to happen, you know, if we just continue to do the same thing over like that we're doing now, this is what can happen. But if other things change through policy, infrastructure investment, that can also be shifted. And so I think we should also be thinking about, for our regional community, how do we want to grow, and therefore where should we invest our dollars to facilitate that growth? I think relevant to this, you know, I read about Southwest Gas recent or proposed rate increases. And one of them, for example, one of the reasons for the rate increase is to help build out infrastructure to lower densities kind of areas in the suburbs of Tucson. And so I think there's other factors to be thinking of here about what happens when we facilitate continued growth further away from where core infrastructure currently exists. So I just wanted to add in that piece of here. And I have other thoughts, but I'll pause for now.
Okay, thank you. Dale.
Okay, I'll mention, first off, in answering your question, Tom, I've identified 3 basic areas where I think we may have a voter issue with having development. The number one on my list was the Southeast, like the discussion we've already been having. Number 2 on that is the Northeast, and I'll be very honest, I don't see a whole lot of specific projects that are needed, or specific projects that are even proposed in the Northeast quadrant. And then the other one is that portion of the county that lies between the cities of Marana, Oro Valley, and the city of Tucson. And I think there's kind of a hole in that area. With that said, I'm going to go back to the Southeast because I think it's probably the most important. Number 1, we talked about the conversation we just had. I happen to, one of my other things I do, I'm a member of the Park Tucson Commission, and I represent Ward 4, which is the southeast part of the city of Tucson, and the Park Tucson Commission. And I discussed it with the staff there, and they've said that basically what they are really aware of and what's critical to them is that projects that lie west of Houghton, basically to the base, north of Valencia, up to the Irvington area, because the state is prioritizing the development of the land along that west side of Houghton Road. Yeah. And so they're really concerned about projects there. And I'm headed towards a distinction I want to make here. There's obviously the Vail situation, and the Vail situation, or the out of the area includes Rocking K Ranch. The current area Rocking K's got under development, I would guess, is 20 to 25% developed at this point, and it's moving fairly quickly. I think that will stop for the time being because of the interest rates. But they're putting in infrastructure for a major section of the Rocking K. The part of the Rocking K that lies along the Rincon Creek, they haven't even said what they were going to do with development in that area. Now, just as a background,
There is a specific plan.
Yeah. Yeah, the county has that plan, and they're free to develop it, but they haven't.
The zoning plan.
Yeah, right.
That's kind of what Josh was talking about.
Right.
These areas that already have entitlements at some level of entitlement are factored into the population projections. Okay.
Okay. Not to make this too long, what I basically want to come down to is what I view is there's actually 2 sub areas in the east side issue. One is those areas that are in Ward 4 that are along Houghton Road and South Harrison Road, etc., that are going to be issues. And the other is the Vail area itself, the old village of Vail, and this associated development that is basically in the county, although the city has a little sliver of land out there. And so I think we need to think about that. When we talk about Marianne Cleveland Way, there are parts of Marianne Cleveland Way that are in the developed part of Vale. And there are parts of Marianne Cleveland Way that are basically running from Houghton Road to Vale. And the parts that are running from Houghton Road to Vale have a little bit, but not a lot of development. And I'm not sure how fast development is going to go there. I would be interested from the TMC about what sections of Marianne Cleveland Way they would recommend and what they would think about it. And whether, and of course, I think we need to think about the idea was, do we leave part of Marianne Cleveland Way undeveloped at this point and concentrate more out in the Vale area, or do we do that? So I think those are things we need to think about. And I've probably taken up enough time, so.
I think those are good questions for some feedback from the TMC.
Can I ask a clarification on Dale's comment?
Yeah.
When you said the land between Marana and Oro Valley in the city of Tucson, what lands were you referring to?
No, actually, I was saying the lands that are between Tucson, Oro Valley, and Marana, that is county. Basically, what you're talking about is the Orange Grove Road corridor, the Ina Road corridor. The majority of that is actually Pima County.
So you're not talking about further north, because further north is very low density. They're, except for more, they're
Exactly.
not looking for anything, and it's just off of totally the mountain park. But there's not very much land where you're talking about.
Well,
Very small area.
it's
It's been
not.
annexed away over the years.
It's a fairly developed area. It's a lot of the development of the last 20 years has taken place in that area. That was a very hot button issue, if you remember, for us in the previous.
Yep.
I worry a little bit about the history of that area and the fact that I don't think we need to necessarily give that area a big project or anything like that. But I think there needs to be something in the area because those people have been organized in the past, and I suspect they'll be in the future. Oh, and the other thing I did forget to say, when we talk about the Marana, the Northwest, and the Oro Valley and the Sarita issues, I'm very comfortable with what we have proposed in here, or what as the staff has proposed with minimum projects for those areas. You know, from and they're fairly minimum projects, except for up in Marana, we're talking about $180 million for 2 freeway traffic interchanges. That is a huge investment in that area. And I've actually, through Chamber of Commerce and one thing or another, had conversations with a few people from Marana, and as they gave to us, those are the Tangerine and the Cortero were their priority 1-2 projects. And I'm fairly comfortable giving them that chunk of money, but it's a huge chunk of money. So I don't see a lot of where politically, from a voter standpoint, there's a lot to complain about.
Yeah, are the Marana TIs feasible for cost sharing with ADOT? ADOT doesn't even show them on its
ADOT
long-term plan.
My understanding is ADOT does not feel they have money to do those. Right? If those are going to get done, they're going to be done by Pima County. And that's my understanding. That's my understanding from a person or two I talked to.
That's tough. I think Garland, did you want to clarify something that was just said?
No, I was gonna add my comments, but I'll defer to Bruce. And
Okay, we have a couple others on in the queue, and Justine, I think, is the next one. Oh, your hand's down now. Did you get yours answered, Justine?
Oh, thank you. I sort of did and didn't, and I just wasn't sure, you know, if this is a time to kind of talk about those ideas of induced demand when we're talking about kind of creating roadways that are expanded to allow for more traffic to come by, if that's something that we might discuss, especially again, in the face of kind of a really scary climate situation, more carbon emissions and yeah, so I guess I was just kind of thinking about that as we were talking about some of these projects. And I know it had been brought up in the past, that idea of induced demand, and I don't know that we fully discussed that as a committee together. So I just kind of had that on my mind. Sorry. It was a while ago, so, but thank you.
All right, thanks. Bruce.
Yeah, I've alluded to the issue, the importance of the Southeast, but I'd just like to offer a couple of data points for the committee to consider. And have to first share, for 25 years, I ran the largest employment center in Vail, which is UA Tech Park. But currently I'm helping to advise a group that's looking at incorporation. As part of that process, we've gone through a very fact-based analysis, and I just thought I'd share a couple of thoughts about that. First of all, with respect to Boss's point about development and planning, there have been three critical decisions that have been made about that are going to impact growth in Vail. One is the city's just rezoned 2,000 acres along Interstate 10 for intense industrial development. The county's adopted a Southeast Logistics and Manufacturing Plan just for 4,000 acres just west of the fairgrounds, which will accommodate millions of industrial and commercial development. And the UA Tech Park is continuing its growth and expansion as a population base. Secondly, responding to the public point of view, as part of our process, we've held 10 public meetings. We've surveyed through a community survey over 900 people and just completed a voter survey. And next to the issue of wanting self-determination, the most critical issue identified by the residents of Vail is transportation and transportation funding, and the thought that they don't have a voice at the table to ensure that they're one of the jurisdictional considerations. The last point I would make is we can look out 20 years, but the kind of development that's happening in Vail is now and not later. And we risk the challenge of we wait till that development's happened, and then we face the very expensive proposition of having to go back in and respond to that congestion and that growth after the fact. This is an opportunity to try to be thoughtful and planful and to respond to the growth that's happening and going to happen in the Vail area in the future. So I would just really urge the committee to give serious consideration to the Colossal Cave and Marianne Cleveland projects.
Arlen, let me get with Ron first. He's had his hand up. Sort of up on him.
Yeah, I agree with Mary in that if we are going to get votes from Oro Valley and Marana, which is 100,000 people, you're going to have something that's more substantial than the projects that we're showing. And as Dale pointed out, I think, and I believe Rick at one time, the Ina Road project is a corridor project that would show, I think, bring support from mostly Oro Valley, people that live along the Catalina foothills who want access to the interstate, and the Marana people. I think if we go as it is, I don't think you can get a lot of support out of those two areas. And the other issue that we should think about is the fact that Tucson just voted money for transportation. And a lot of those people are not going to understand why is it I'm voting for more. So I don't think you're going to get full support in Tucson. We need to bring in support from the outlying areas if we can.
Great point.
Could I respond to Bruce?
Go ahead.
Bruce, I just want to respond. I think you can tell the folks you're working with that there is plenty of representation for the southeast side here. There is you. Jamie, I think he said he lives there now. All the people that have been spoken of. Dale is, representing Ward 4 on the Parks Commission, has an interest in that side of town, and Mary has brought that up a couple times. So I think you should tell them that they actually, in my opinion, almost have outsized here at this table.
The point I was making in response to the surveys was the fact that they don't have a voice at PEG and the RTA. Their county supervisor who represents the area does a great job, but his district extends from Green Valley from Mount Lemmon, and he has to represent a number of different constituencies.
Gotcha.
So I'm not suggesting they haven't had a voice at this table. I'm saying over the long run, they're not represented at the table as a jurisdiction. And that's one of the reasons that they're pursuing incorporation, because that would get them a seat at the table. And all I'm trying to suggest is that the survey work, not my opinion, says that transportation is the largest single motivation for why they're viewing a corporation at this point. So,
I recall on a couple occasions Supervisor Scott, who's on the RTA board, has made it really clear that he's not representing District 1, but the entire county, and that's to be seen, but anyway, just my comments.
Okay, we have Patricia and then Arlen and then Boss and Abby.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few comments and requests for broader information, maybe at future meetings that have kind of been building. So sorry that there's going to be like 4 things that I want to say, but had my hand up for a minute, so they've been accumulating. Okay, number 1, so thinking through concerns, I'm hearing a lot of people thinking through concerns and like considerations about what voter base might like for approval of this plan potentially. I dug up like an old election results summary, but I was unable to parse through like jurisdiction identifying numbers. And I don't know if I missed this being a newer member on the CAC, but do we have data about who voted in the last election? Could that be valuable in understanding, you know, major voting blocks? Like, could we get a presentation of that information is one question. And then regarding, I'm not sure who just made this comment, but concerns about Tucson maybe being unwilling to vote for this. I mean, I think that's part of our job to craft a narrative of collaboration and demonstrate how this package is beneficial to Tucson residents, where the majority of potential voters and users live. So that's one thing about considerations of voting. I don't know if I should pause in between my statements / questions.
I'll look around to see if hands suddenly come up or people start standing up in their chairs, and I'll let you know if we should pause to discuss.
Okay.
But so far, looks like only a few nods, and you can continue.
Thank you so much.
Patricia, if I might just add, like, I really liked your point about. I'm sorry.
I spoke too soon.
It's hard to read nods on the internet. I thanks for bringing up the voting question. Is it possible? Could staff pull together a review, since everybody's been referencing how we're going to get people to vote and who we think is going to vote? Could staff pull together numbers from recent relevant elections, including like RTA 1? I think Pima County had a bond not too long ago, just to understand how areas have voted and supported such tax increases. I think City of Tucson, I'm really not concerned about voting for improvements in infrastructure. If there's community buy-in, I think that if there's a concern, it's going to be about where are the projects that are being done and what is the focus on it? Is it auto-centric or is it human-centric and really focused on that? And that's going to be the bigger hill to craft in this plan, and getting, you know, the majority of voters, which lie in the city limits, to buy into this plan. So, but I would like to have that as a formal request if we're going to be doing this voter, thinking about voters, getting a summary of past election results.
Yep, we'll get that information.
Cool. Moss and Patricia, I've been looking for that recently, and on the county elections website, it doesn't really, you have to do your own analysis, but I do remember that it has been done for elections. The Arizona Daily Star, they have big pictures of where people voted for it, against it, all these different elections. 2006 was a long time ago in terms of what we've been hearing about growth and turnover too here, and probably the recent 2 county bond elections. I was involved in that one too. So it's not going to be a perfect picture, but the best way is to, I mean, really just Google it. But I think the newspapers, maybe the Tucson Citizen was still around then, to do those kind of analyses based on like the really simple way to consume it, other than doing your own.
That's fine. I think as long as that gets distributed to us or presented in a presentation, that's fine. I think, yeah, just so that we all are looking at this, we're looking at the same information and not Googling something accidentally.
So, Mr. Chair, just for everybody's benefit, as we all recall, really the 2006 RTA initiative was the only thing that we can compare as apples to apples, and anything else would not be a good comparison, but we'll be happy to pull that information. But additionally, I just want to remind everyone that we do intend, once there's a draft plan, to take it out there and obviously go through the polling process and everything else. So that information is forthcoming once there's a draft plan, and then we can come back and make adjustments afterwards. So there's plenty of opportunities to make those adjustments based on what you believe the voters will support.
Okay, thank you. Arlen.
Oh, sorry, I had more, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot.
No worries. Okay. Okay, another sort of request for information. I'd asked for maybe like a presentation on whatever data PAG or other sources has about commutership and like regional movement. We're trying to consider regional benefit here, but something that's more than anecdotal evidence about the movement of people, like where are people coming from? Where are they going every day? What are the corridors that really do connect different parts of the region? Like, I don't know that I have a like data level understanding of that to the extent that we do have that information. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Now, Abby, let me clarify, or Patricia, can we clarify that?
Yeah,
you're
please.
talking about where people are moving. Are you talking about influx of population, or are you?
Oh,
talking
sorry, I
about,
didn't know,
vehicle
like
movement.
vehicles, bus ridership, any type of mobility. Yeah, sorry, I don't mean about population. Those maps were helpful and that explanation was helpful, but just thinking through like, yeah, where are people coming from and going to every day? What are the major corridors that people are using? That type of information. And then last sort of request for information, I had this on my list to bring up, and then Justine kind of mentioned it as I was waiting. But the last request is more about kind of the projects themselves. I'm sorry, not my last, actually my third of four. This is more about the projects with themselves, not necessarily like current or projected conditions, but how the proposed projects we're seeing predict actually affecting situations on our roads. So like we hear a lot about congestion. And so if we're talking about relieving it, can we get more information? I don't know if it's from the jurisdictions or other experts or whoever, but on things like how bus pullouts can actually alleviate congestion for personal vehicles and aren't just, you know, a transit upgrade in a modernization project. Or yeah, again, the concept of induced demand, which is something I think deserves discussion here. Just more of like how some of the actual strategies in these projects relate to our guiding principles would be really great. And then finally, just a general comment on the questions posed at the beginning of this meeting. I think that was a helpful way to structure this conversation, so I'm appreciative of that. I would like to invite us as a group representing residents to like think past what is maybe geographically missing or potentially controversial in the political environment that we're currently in, and think about what might be missing in terms of things aligned with our guiding principles, like all this thought work that we did. So equity and climate responsiveness keep coming up. These are two characteristics whose impacts will actually outlast many of the road projects or infrastructures or whatever we end up trying to build here, and can nudge the fate of our entire region. So I just wanted to throw that in there as like another bigger question when we're framing these discussions. And I am done. Thank you very much.
I think the last comment is a good one, and we've sort of been nibbling around the edges of that from other comments today. I'd invite everyone to keep a copy of the guiding principles, our goals in front of you, and remember that we've at least done one exercise where we've tried to create a tool that helped us manage some of that, some of those goals, or most of those goals. And then we've also done our own ranking system, which also looked at those goals. But try to keep those goals in front of you while we're talking, because as we talk about specific projects, I think we want now to expose, if we can, where we feel that either we're helping or hurting, you know, those goals and the metrics that we had developed for them. Just in general, I think we can handle those best on project by project discussions that we might have. But I'm open to your thoughts about it as well. Josh?
Mr. Chair, members, if I may address, I forget which question it was, but I think it was 4A, maybe 4B. As a related, you're interested in getting more information about kind of the commuter flows. I don't have that to share explicitly with the information at your fingertips, but you also had a question about congestion. And so I just kind of want to, because we did kind of, with the new group, didn't go into as many details as we did with the original group on some of the data sources, but there is a congestion layer. There are actually three sets of congestion layers at your disposal in the platform that have been affiliated with each project for you to use. Those metrics didn't necessarily come across in the goal, the CAC priority framework exercise. I'm sorry, evaluation scoring exercise, but that congestion is certainly something that we pay attention to. And it is the input for that congestion assessment is where are people living and working. So the commute component comes into play where these graphics aren't going to fully express it. But understanding where people currently are living and where we expect for them to live helps inform the congestion data that is available and is expressed under these columns here for current roadway congestion and congestion for future roadway. And if you look at the CAC list equals yes, you will see that a lot of the list of 33, right, we added Drexel, 33 projects is really affecting other performance areas besides congestion. We have two projects here that are in the poorly performing congestion area. So where safety is certainly holding strong, poorly performing safety areas are definitely showing up in the CACs in this initial overlap between the CAC priority ranking and the TMC workshop. So this is some access to that information. It's the best available information we have for the region. And just kind of wanted to remind everyone that this information is at your fingertips. It's also available in that map view where you can look at congestion. This is the first point one is the intersections, and then this is the 2019 current congestion and the 2045 future congestion.
Hey, Josh, I'm in this review page and I'm still having issues with that legend functionality. It's just showing, it's not providing any of those options. So that would be really helpful to get access to do this review.
Yeah, what's your browser? I'm sorry.
Chrome.
Oh, no, okay.
Is it a Chrome thing?
It should be fine. It should be fine there. I thought you were gonna say some weird one and I could give you a better answer. I don't know why. It should be working. Let's follow up this afternoon on getting that fixed. I'm sorry.
Anyone else who has those issues, let Josh know. Farhad?
So thank you for that, Josh. Just to add to what you said, just want to remind the committee that the exercise is ongoing. We update that information as needed, obviously. Most recently was all updated in our 2020 adopted long-range plan. And we're in that process of updating the plan against a lot of the information that we have, all the data that we have is really the foundation of what you have in your portal. So performance measures, all the data that Josh has been working on, it comes from all these other sources. It's already there. So I appreciate the question. Let us know. We can point to where that data is actually being used and we're applying that information, because that's really critical for everybody to understand that we have a foundation you're trying to build on.
So this does bring me back to a data point I asked about a couple months ago. I had pointed staff towards the RTA, or sorry, excuse me, the Cal California Transportation Department, they had an induced demand calculator since, and like recognizing, okay, if we add these lanes, if we build this here, how much congestion will be created over this time period, given, you know, the well-researched, you know, idea of induced demand with transportation. Has that methodology been integrated with these projects just so we could understand how shifts and such like that will add congestion in the future if it's a road widening or like interstate expansion or whatever, and versus projects that might be reducing lanes or maintaining them? I think that induced demand calculation would be really helpful for this refinement of the list. And there's a whole methodology. I know California has it, and I think I've seen it other few states and jurisdictions that have been deploying similar methods for that more accurate congestion calculation.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the induced command, we haven't run any additional analysis evaluating congestion on these or the impact that these have. So this is reflecting the work that went through that long-term planning exercise that was adopted in 2020.
Mr. Chair, again, as a reminder for the committee's benefit, once we have a package, at that time, we're going to go ahead and look at our modeling and run that analysis with the package of projects. Our model that we use doesn't allow analysis of individual corridors. It's a package of projects at a regional level. So once we get to that level, that's where Josh and his team are going to look at and then provide that narrative of what the benefits are by making those investments. So just make sure you all know that is something that will be coming later in the process.
Okay.
I guess I can, Tom, if I may, I have a concern with that just because we are using congestion and like level of service right as a factor within these calculations and how the evaluation tool ranked out and everything. And so I think if we're basing decisions on incomplete information that's related to congestion, we should, like, it is important for us to have that full picture with induced demand. Because if we're like, oh my gosh, we're gonna fund this project and it's actually going to create more congestion in this area because of a widening or whatever, you know, that it seems very relevant to the list that we will be defining, or we will be, you know, formulating together. And it's like I guess I'm confused because we have a package of projects here, and so it seems that we could run that idea that that calculation on this package of projects and just add a column.
I think that's going to be something, you know, as you look at the current performance of the roadway and the projected future performance, the projects selected aren't honestly having a relatively minor overall impact on future roadway congestion. And so that, I think, is an expression of the CAC goals, prioritizing other emphasis areas. And so I mean, further exploration of this is going to kind of further shine a light on that.
Well, I think the question is whether there's an induced demand component to the modeling.
It's I mean, as previously discussed, it's inherent in the modeling.
Yeah.
That is what it delivers. So
yeah.
Isolating it out, I get it, I understand, but there's also a balancing of, well, there is adopted entitlement. There are adopted subdivisions and projects that are going to be happening in our region. And so how do we balance that? And having to think through, it's not just going to be some number or metric. It's I feel we have to kind of move into that stage of looking at what the overall balance of the projects are going to be doing and how we can think about their services.
Okay, thank you. Harlan.
Thank you.
Am I still on this?
Yeah.
I've got several comments. And it's from looking at it from a maybe a slightly different perspective, I guess. First of all, I looked at this list of the named projects. It's not that these are the only ones, there are other ones on here. And from the standpoint of the regional visioning that we did 10 years ago with Imagine Greater Tucson, I look at all of these projects are within the context of where we wanted to be as a community. All of them, almost all of them are playing catch up with things that have happened and we need to fix to get there. The only potential exception on that list, and I'll explain why I don't think it is the planning for the Sonoran Corridor. And that is because ultimately the Sonoran Corridor will be necessary, in my opinion, to relieve the congestion that happens to move some traffic around literally around the valley as opposed to through it in that perspective. And so that's some comfort. The second thing is that we tend to look at the map depending on where our focus point is. For me, it's central Tucson because I live in central Tucson. I've always lived in central Tucson. And Vail, which seems to be a long way out there, Marana's that seems to be a long way out there, the southwest area, a long way out there, aren't actually. They are areas that are, the growth has been planned for, the growth has been partially completed, more completed in some areas like in Oro Valley. And what we, I think, need to do from the standpoint of making our recommendations more meaningful is look at these as we're building communities of live, work, play. And it used to bother me that we were shoving all these jobs down where Bruce was on the southeast and everybody's commuting from the northwest. Well, now what we've got is we've got a community of workers in Vail, and they are they don't necessarily have to come into Tucson or go through Tucson to Marana or up into Oro Valley just to get to work. If we manifest the changes that we make out there so that it's a less a bedroom community than another live, work, play type of a community. So there's 2 points here. One is, I think I agree with everyone who said that we need to spend a little more time thinking about what Vail is going to need or what we can do for the Vail area, because we can create that live, work, play situation. The reason I got on this committee was to tie land use with transportation. This is as close as I've gotten to it so far.
We need to quickly pivot.
Yeah, God forbid we should be doing this. And so from that perspective, looking at Colossal Cave Road, looking at Marianne Cleveland Way, at least at a minimum, I think is important. I know Houghton isn't particularly on here, but then we've already got improvements planned for Houghton Road, if I understand correctly. So what happens, let's assume that the state land on the west side of Houghton begins to go. It's a long time to get state land developed, as I'm aware of anyway. But in addition, some additional lands on the east side of Houghton Road, adding to that. all of that can be the fuel for a live, work, play community that doesn't have to rely on Tucson. If Marana develops the way that Marana said it wants to develop, similar will happen up there. And we can delete some of the traffic that comes through the city of Tucson, or at least not add significantly to it, from people going from the northwest to the southeast and other directions as such. So getting me to where I wanted to talk, specifically mention, I think we need to focus more on the Vail area because number one, it's a growing area. It makes sense to do. It's good planning, and it's also where a significant amount of votes are. From the person who, or the people who were talking about getting the voter records, it is equally important to know the percentage of people who vote in elections in certain areas as it is whether they voted yes or no on transportation. We used to do everything in this valley based on will Green Valley support it, because Green Valley votes like at 102% of its population, something like that. Well, there's almost nothing in this plan for Green Valley specifically because they don't need anything. It's done. It's a mature community, and I don't mean that just from an age perspective.
I think I mentioned at our last meeting also that many of the improvements that may be seen in Green Valley will be in the categorical.
Right.
Because as you say, they're more focused on a mature system.
And that will need to be an emphasis. When I look at the northwest side, there does seem to be some things lacking. The one road that was on the county's list, I'm not saying that we have to do this per se, but the one road on the county's list that as much time I spent on the northwest side listening to people say, when are you going to do Thornydale? When are you going to do Thornydale? Thornydale's on the county's list. It's not on our list. It's in between the Oro Valley and Marana town limits. And I know that there's some environmental considerations there, I know from Carolyn's perspective, but it also, it probably needs to be done. Another way of getting south from Tangerine into at least the northwest part of town, at least to Ina, without having to go down the freeway, which is going to be a parking lot, because we're putting all of our stupid commercial along the freeway, which we shouldn't be doing. But I said that out loud, I guess, didn't I? It's got to be service to neighborhoods, to build a neighborhood type community there. So that's one road that I think would make a difference on the northwest side. I don't know in terms of the southwest area what would be necessary. There's a lot of discussion about Drexel. I see Valencia didn't and Ajo didn't finish high in terms of what needs to be serviced out there. But the southwest area is developing. It's lagging a little behind the others. So those are areas that I would concentrate on. In addition, I wanted to make a remark about, you talked about some that I'm not sure about deleted that were on the list. And this isn't the only one, but it's the one that popped up to me because I'm using it on a regular basis, which is the stage 3 or part 3 of the SR 210, the one that goes from Ajo Way to I-10. And the reason I'm saying that is that it's got beautiful pavement on it. It's wonderful. Traffic moves very smoothly on that. Where it gets screwed up, it seems, at least from my experience driving that on a pretty regular basis now, is where stage 1 and stage 2 are. Those make sense to me. Stage 3 makes less sense to me for if I had to prioritize. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. this is leading us into a couple of the other questions that Paki had put up at the beginning of the meeting, or at the beginning of this item, and I'm going to get to those very shortly. Excuse me. But first, Abby has been patiently waiting at the end of the line, and she'll be next. And then Chris and Joanne. And then I'm gonna tell you just to hold on to those comments, and you'll still get a chance to make them, but we will also ask that those additional questions. Thanks.
Hey, Tom.
Just so we can keep going.
Hey, Tom.
Sorry, Moss, I have the floor.
Oh, I know. I was just, I want to make sure I was on the list. It looked like somebody lowered my hand and I thought I was before you, but so I just wanted to make sure that I had time to make.
My hand has been up for about 15 minutes. I asked intentionally to go to the back of the line.
No, that's not fine, Abby. I'm just speaking to Tom to make sure that it's known that my hand has been up as well for a while. So thank you, but go ahead.
I asked to be put after other people because I wanted to hear what folks had to say, and this was very helpful. I don't want to be redundant, but I do want to synthesize a lot of what people said, because I think together we are piecing together a regional plan. I'm going to try to keep this as coherent and short as possible. So I'm going to start as small as possible, because that's the easiest way for me to think. So Key ID Project 1524 was removed from the list of 32 that we're passing on. That is a South Tucson project for a protected bike path. It was ranked by the CAC as high priority, number 6, in fact. And it was estimated at a whopping cost of $200, I think. 205. Oh, they're missing 1,000. I was wondering about that. Thank you. I was like, it costs more than that to paint my living room. How is this possible? Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Take that part out of it, but it was ranked as high priority by us. It is a South Tucson project. There aren't many of it. It didn't make the list. And I think that ties into a question that we've had a lot about what is regional, and we still haven't defined it. And I'm going to bounce off of what Arlen just said about making communities be independent, sustainable communities. If our individual neighborhoods and our individual communities have everything we need and have a way to keep people local, it's not that we don't want people to visit and we don't want commerce and cross community transportation, but it's great if we can have people on the road less. It's better for safety, it's better for climate change. And those are the lenses I view everything through. I am a pedestrian and a cyclist and a bus user in Midtown Tucson, and pedestrian fatalities are through the roof. And climate change is disproportionately created by lower density communities, and it affects higher density communities more. So we are all connected in that. When we're looking at the heat map that Josh pulled up from, I think, the RMAP of growth, it's basically the inverse of a heat map the New York Times released last week of CO2 emissions. And you can use that map and select even in our community. And you can see that high density neighborhoods like mine in Midtown have far less per capita emissions rates than lower density communities. So when we're looking at increasing roads and we're looking at increasing sprawl, we're not paying attention to that CO2 map. We can all have our wonderful, independent, pedestrian-friendly, downtown business communities that aren't connected, but ultimately we are all connected by water scarcity. We're all going to be connected by climate impacts. And so every local project is regional, because that does affect everyone when we need fewer roads. And every regional project also has a local impact. I think that Jamie's question about what does modernization look like is really relevant on the ground to our communities, and then that ties into votes. So I think about the Broadway widening, which now apparently has bike lanes. I will never, ever ride my bike on Broadway. That is a terrifying place. There's a thin painted white stripe. It's usually obstructed. No way. So I think the question of what this looks like in our high-minded projects versus what it's looked like on the ground and what people have experienced I think that matters a lot. And so I think it's very hard for us to put forward these project lists without knowing what that's looked like. Also wanted to talk about votes.
Hey, Abby, could I interrupt
Oh,
for a
connected.
second?
Yeah.
And just ask you to
Sure.
tell us how you would like to see that information imparted to everyone.
About modernization or?
No, about what they look like on the ground. That
I think-
kind of, more intimate knowledge of the project proposal or the scope.
So
That may not, are you saying that you don't think it shows up in the database that we have? That it's just not as apparent because you have to dig for it?
I don't think that voters are going to support it. And that's what I was going to get to next.
Not going to support what?
Not going to support projects that just say modernization when what we've seen is bike alleys that are deadly on Broadway. And you still look at that sign below the Rattlesnake Bridge that says, widening your road, increasing pedestrian or sidewalks, bike lanes, landscaping. If you wouldn't let your 8-year-old grandkid bike there, it's not a bike lane and it's not a pedestrian walkway. And so, Tom, maybe I don't have a solution, but I think that identifying the problem is first. And that goes to votes, which bounces off of what Ronald said and off of Pocky's guiding questions for this, which is just sort of more inequity and things that we need to confront here. So the city of Tucson represents what, 50 or 60% of the population of this area, but is a disenfranchised voting area. It's the youngest population of any of these jurisdictions. So it's the most people who are going to be here in 2045. But, children under the age of 18 can't vote. And because it is poorer and more people of color and my former line of work, more people with felony convictions, people can't vote and they don't vote as high of rates. And so I think when we're talking about catering to voters, we should still be talking about serving the community and not just who will vote. And I think to Ronald's point that we could maybe get more turnout from these higher enfranchised areas, maybe, but the city of Tucson voters could also turn out and vote no. It's not just that they might not vote. And anybody who watched the last mayor and council meeting already knows how things are going with the city of Tucson here, is that people on the ground in the city of Tucson are seeing the projects didn't happen, that the streets are still bad, that there doesn't appear to be money for maintenance of the streets, that things that we thought we were getting, like modernizations, aren't happening. And so I'm gonna wrap this up. I think we need to think, so I started out small, I think we need to think on a really high level here, which is that this plan is really important. Transportation does shape everything else. We all have been entrusted with like godlike powers here to shape the future of the community. And I'm speaking a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think that we need to understand that that's a huge responsibility and that it should be our job to figure out what we want. And if we understand what we want and we have a coherent idea based on our guiding principles, based on our conversations, we can take that and we can sell it to all of our communities, right? We have projects for all of the jurisdictions individually, but we can also explain this is why a walkable park in Vail matters to you voters in Oro Valley. This is why, a road diet in Tucson matters to people in Marana. And I think that if it's something that we believe in and it's coherent and cohesive, then it's something we can sell. So I would ask us to be concerned first with what we want and why that matters and why it works together. And think and have some faith in ourselves that when we get that, that's something that we can explain and get the votes for. I'm done. Thanks.
Promises.
Could I ask Gabby a question?
Yeah, please. There's some gratuity things to talk about.
So Abby, you bring up something really important in terms of the quality of design and the nature of the projects themselves. Something I had raised really 3 or 4 years ago. Notwithstanding the specific projects that we're looking at, how would you see us embedding sort of those principles and those design standards and that functionality into these projects as a committee? how do we bring that forward for consideration as we go forward with the plan? Do you have some ideas about that?
I actually have more questions, but I don't actually know where the disconnect was between the plan to widen Broadway. Widen Broadway. I don't know where the disconnect was between the plan that included theoretically bike lanes and what we see on the ground. Somebody here probably has the answer. Who's responsible for that? You're responsible for that, Dale.
On you.
If you come up, let Dale answer the question since I can't answer.
You know, the bottom line is ultimately Broadway committee voted as number one priority was to protect buildings. And bottom line is once we decided to protect the buildings as the number one priority, then the planning narrowed it down to get it through between the buildings. And I, to be very honest, I have some of the same concerns you have about it. I'll be very honest, I will tell you from having been on the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee until basically it died, that the bicycle community was always bifurcated between those who were
Commuters.
hard nosed riders and those who were leisure riders. And in many of those people wanted to have the access, and basically there were decisions to try to get both scenarios where you have bike boulevards and bike, as we called them that day, back those days, we didn't call it bike boulevards, but that's what we're talking about. Putting bike boulevards in for the people who wanted, as you do, a more safe situation, and the riders who were more aggressive and are willing to get into traffic. And so the bicycle lanes are there probably as they're structured for those hardcore riders. If there aren't hardcore riders, they're not going to be used, because I wouldn't get on Broadway with a bicycle either. But, you know, from the Broadway development, the key decision was protect the building. And once you go to protect the buildings, we actually have medians that are like 18 inches wide places on Broadway, just to get the roadway through there. And so that obviously squeezed the sidewalks in places, it squeezed the bike lanes in places. So I agree with your criticism, but that's why.
Okay, so I guess if I can respond to Bruce, then bouncing this through here, I guess we would need to explain to the residents of the community how we're going to stay on top of oversight about all these projects, because I mean, I am an aggressive biker when I need to be, because when you have a narrow lane like that, it's actually much safer to take traffic. It's safer to just go be in a bike lane, in a car lane, but that's not ideal. Ideally, we can have 8-year-olds on protected bike lanes and not have to worry about it. Not have grownups whose brains are worth far less. So.
Okay, next, Chris, and then Joanne, and then we'll bring up those other questions. I know that, Moss, I know your hand's up, and you'll be the first one I call on after we at least get that second question on the table. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Everything Abby said. Thank you.
Okay.
He's a lawyer too, so.
Yeah, I know. And another lawyer that,
You guys know.
except that, are you sure, Chris? Are you still a lawyer? That was not nearly enough words.
I'm very sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And next is Joanne.
I can figure out how to get off mute. My question is regarding, it's been a bit ago about looking at voter trends. And my thought was, Mr. Chairman, is this something that we should create almost like a working subcommittee to work with staff in order to get this put together? Or is this going to be a staff only project? That was mine.
Staff would love to do it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, again, it's mostly pulling all the information from 2006 and sending that to you for your information. Obviously, from our perspective, we've had couple of presentations in the past that we discussed are kind of a prediction of what the future voter block would look like versus 2006. We'll share that presentation with everybody again. And again, as a couple other members discussed, you know, the nature of the ballot initiative obviously would make a difference, and the turnout would make a difference. So there are a lot of predictions that I think it's too early. Once we actually have a draft plan and we poll the voters, then that's really where we can bring information back to you, and all of that would be done by staff and consultants.
Yeah, Joanne, I would ask that staff provide that information to us via email before our next meeting, and that you take a quick look at that or an immediate look at it, so that any questions can be followed up, and the rest of the committee can hear those. I know there are several election veterans, if you will, in our group, and some of their perspectives will be helpful, I'm sure. But again, as we've said, this is very preliminary for you know, trying to assess the voter patterns that we're going to see in 2 years or whenever this does get to the voters, and without seeing kind of what we'd be selling, if you will, to the voters or presenting to the public, it's a little hard to, I guess, go much farther than reading about history at this time. At least that's my perspective of it.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. I'm going to ask Pocky to pull up, but just so that you all know, I have Moss on deck and Karen Carl after that.
Oh, the second question was about controversy. Just keeping in mind the voters, which of these projects would be, you know, considered to be controversial? Any hot button issues, anything that causes heartburn? So that's the discussion for this.
And remind us. Just
Oh, and then the
quickly
third
about the
is,
third question.
what project may not be viewed as a regional project based on their location or on the scope, or both?
Yeah, and that's been kind of hinted about a couple of times already, so that's good. Yeah, Kevin?
Oh, no, after. I'll go at the
Okay,
end of the
all
line.
right, your hand is up.
Okay, no.
Moss? Your
Thanks,
turn.
Tom. Well, going way back, I just want to support Mary's comments about the Drexel segment, and then related to Marianne Cleveland. My understanding is the city of Tucson with the Prop 411 dollars is planning, or it's on the Marianne Cleveland, or a segment of it is on the list for funding and improvements. And I think it would be helpful as part of that Marianne Cleveland discussion to hear also from the city of Tucson, so that we understand where that connection with city funded infrastructure improvements connects to what's been submitted. So just adding a note there. Related to like kind of this question about, you know, what's given some heartburn. I think as Abby really well pointed out, there's a lot of concern within the city of Tucson residents about the RTA Next plan, given projects undelivered, especially First Avenue, which is a really high profile and important safety project for our community. And it also adds a very important regional connection to the north, to the south, and all those benefits. So City of Tucson voters are on edge, not because of having to pay for another project or another regional project. They're concerned about the dynamics of this organization. And I think especially I was crunching some of the numbers, you know, based on the Prop 411 tax, which is another half-cent sales tax that we recently passed with 70% of support by Tucsonans. That level of tax would cover all of the projects that the city of Tucson has submitted to the RTA. And that's beyond what's on this list. So like I think it's total to about 660 million projects that city of Tucson has submitted funding for. And the projections for Prop 411 is to raise like over 700 million. So we could do more with a separate tax. So I'm concerned, I'm raising this because I know we're trying to focus on regionalism, and I'm all for that. But there's some really raw numbers here that just don't make sense to Tucson voters. And then, with that too, looking at tax data, like looking at that same tax revenue estimates from Prop 411 against the RTA's largest annual revenue or revenue for a year, Tucson would be contributing about 67% of the taxes to the RTA Next plan based on those estimates. So it's just, some of these things about who's bearing costs, where projects are, all of these things, what's getting invested in. These are the questions that City of Tucson voters are going to be asking. Why are we supporting a plan when we've already had issues getting our projects delivered? So I wanted to note that for consideration. And then I also created a quick pivot table of the project list that we have here and summarized by jurisdiction, what proportion of funding would be allocated to each jurisdiction. And right now, ADOT is comprising about 30% of the budget that we have for named projects. Marana is about 15 to 16% of the budget. All the other jurisdictions are between 1 and 6%, and then City of Tucson's about 40%. Just for context, I think that's looking at not even geographically where projects are distributed, but also what dollars are being taken up by that will be a really important data point. And I'm hoping that staff in the future could, for these conversations, provide some of that proportionality as far as funding, so that we could look at it from that perspective. And on the ADOT projects, I'm especially concerned. I think Mike Ortega said this really well at the last TMC meeting. It's not that we don't recognize as a region how important ADOT has been for certain investments in our infrastructure. The question is, given that the ADOT does have another funding source, PAG, for its projects, whether it's a good use of our regional tax dollars collected through the RTA to fund ADOT projects. They have another option. As people from, talking of DeVale, some places don't have another option. So I really would like to see a list with next to zero ADOT dollars on here, or significantly reduced. And likewise with the Marana projects, just thinking about population size and even those growth maps, I'm not sure that it fully justifies 15% of our budget. And similarly in the last TMC, Paul Kiesler from Oro Valley was talking about how in the past 2 years, they've seen their project costs increase from 30 to 40%. So that would add to this, assuming Marana would have a similar relationship with their project cost increases as Oro Valley, that could add up to $315 million to these two Marana projects. And my understanding is that Marana and Oro Valley are some of the jurisdictions that haven't submitted their updated cost estimates. I think they happened a couple of years ago before the pandemic and inflation. So I'm just throwing out some of these numbers, looking at these projects and getting concerned with our budget, getting concerned about how we're going to sell this to Tucson voters who are really skittish about, trust in this taxing district. And then the other thing, I've heard a lot of conversation about economic development and the intersection with transportation investment. One thing we know is that companies make very specific decisions about where they go because of looking at livability and quality of life for their employees. And I think what Abby was pointing out as far as where greenhouse gas emissions are, where things are developing, if we're going to be a region of strip malls, people aren't going to want to live here. And they've demonstrated that over and over with some of the decisions that they've made. And so I think, and there's just an abundance of research pointing to kind of less auto-centric development, how that improves quality of life, that improves livability, that improves economic development and local, natural growth, and there's just all these other benefits. So I just really want us to be, when we're looking at some of these projects in certain areas, and especially in the suburbs and that are smaller and like road widening, like focused on road widening features. Really asking ourselves, do we believe this is really going to improve the economic development of our region, given all these other truths that we know about autocentric development? I also am worried about the lack of projects in the Southwest. I think it would be helpful. Josh, could you actually toggle on the equity map? I'd be curious to see how that looks against some of these projects, because I know that there's a lot of marginalized communities in the Southwest. And so, yeah, so there you go. So not in Vail, in that area where we've been neglecting infrastructure and development, for decades. And this is the opportunity to say, hey, let's improve this for folks. Jamie, I heard you say something about a project that was impacting water access in the Vail area. And just as the Pasquayaki tribe representatives presented that, I was all for ensuring access. And so I would love to know that number to make sure that it's part of our revised list. I think those are the comments I have at the moment. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So Moss, that was a lot of numbers and it was very helpful. I'm wondering if we can get all of that information in writing somewhere. I'm trying to take notes. I don't know if you can email that to Pocky or Tom or someone where you got some of the budget numbers and voter numbers and stuff.
I'm happy to provide, anything. What would be the best way to do that, Tom?
Please send it to us
Yeah,
and
I think so.
we'll include it in the packet next time.
Yeah, send it to Pocky.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, if I may, again, I think everybody needs to recognize that, and we had this conversation before, we're not looking at allocation of funds based on any geographic area or any jurisdiction. That really needs to be at the end product of the conversation. Once you all recognize where those needs are, where the investments should be made, then you can step back at the very end of the process and say, all right, we're investing X amount or portion of the entire $2.3 billion. And are we spreading that fairly and evenly across the region? I think it's really premature to start looking at individual projects or individual jurisdictions and those percentages. I honestly believe that is probably not productive. We'll be happy to share that analysis with you, but I don't believe that's the exercise that would be productive for this group. It's really at the end of the process, once you made your adjustments and you step back and look at it, are we proposing a packet that is something that hopefully the voters will support? That would be my recommendation. Starting to really kind of break down those kind of a regional collaborative discussions this early in the process, I think would not be productive. And then, Mr. Chair, if I may, just to correct the record, the RTA has been very successful, $1.4 billion of investments. Every single project in the plan has been delivered according to the plan so far. And I believe our board will fully support that. The most recent audit that was completed supports that the RTA has been responsive to the community and delivered every single project as promised. So that is mostly for the benefit of the rest of you to recognize that I think the narrative moving forward need to be more of a positive and a productive narrative supporting this regional investment. If we have anybody that believes that is not the case, feel free to call me and I'll demonstrate to you with factual information that we have delivered every single project per the plan or per our governing laws.
Well, if I may, I'm confused because I can think of two projects right off the top of my head from the city of Tucson that have not been delivered and in fact seem to be stalled. And First Avenue is just a prime example of what's not been delivered. So that's just to clarify my comment about where the city of Tucson concerns. And also I'm confused too about this remark because for most of this conversation, we've been hearing about why we need to be investing in Vail and in that area. And so I'm just confused why this is now a point of topic for, not considering jurisdictions.
Okay. Let's let that lie where it is. Karen, you're next.
Hey, thanks. So I want to return to the 10th Avenue bike path, not because, it costs a whopping $200, but
I was just reading.
but really because it's illustrative of a much larger point, which is, you can look at a bike path and everybody's like, oh, great, a bike path. That's awesome. That I voted for it. It seems like it's pretty cool. Makes biking safer. It actually is a protected bike path, which when I looked at the detail on that, it's a concrete curb, which I don't know if that is safer for cyclists. I mean, if it is, great. If it isn't, we need to have a discussion about that. But Tom used the phrase, needing a more intimate sort of understanding of what these projects are. And I feel for my part, speaking for my part, is that's what's lacking here. A protected bike path, which is concrete curbs, kind of reminds me of what they did on 12th Avenue with those big round concrete balls, which ended up being even less safe for cyclists. People were running into them and, and hurting themselves. So I don't know if it's safer, but the point is, it's not specifically about this huge project on 10th Avenue. It's more about understanding sort of the nuts and bolts of what's going on in that community. I mean, I live about 100 feet from 10th Avenue, and I'm sort of up in the air about the project. I guess I would come down on the side of it, but at the same time, I can see arguments the other way. But anyway, that brings me to an agenda item that I did ask about via email, which is it wildly improbable for us to be able to visit these sites with a representative from the jurisdiction? I know logistically it's got to be a nightmare, but I would just love that opportunity. I mean, anybody who is really interested in gaining sort of a hands-on perspective of what this means to the community. Full disclosure, I'm a lawyer too, but I'm not a transportation expert, and I don't have any, planning education in my background. So I feel a little overwhelmed with the terminology, the specifics, and what's best for the community. So, and when we're talking about controversy, I look at that proposal for the HCT from the Tucson Mall to the airport. And if anybody's interested in, sort of educating themselves, I mean, that's pretty controversial with the people who are affected. South Tucson, I live in South Tucson, and it's the poorest city in Arizona, but that doesn't necessarily mean that throwing money into South Tucson is a good thing, right? I mean, this runs right down 6th Avenue, which a lot of people are super concerned about, the effects to the culture there, to the people there, to the spirit of South Avenue, by running, this HCT right down the middle of it. So I don't necessarily think that, just the money allocation itself is a good indicator of how it's going to serve that particular jurisdiction. And I think that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, Karen, I think you bring up some great points. The mitigation of any project is important and probably something that voters are aware of. That is a widening project that may seem to split a neighborhood, or a project that increases capacity and therefore is wider and is more difficult for pedestrians to traverse. and knowing what kinds of mitigation measures might be incorporated into the project is important. And so knowing more about the projects to begin with allows us to see that the scope of work will allow for some of those issues to be mitigated. I know people have asked on numerous occasions, really over the past several years, if we couldn't visit those projects with, someone knowledgeable about the scope of the project, so that some questions could be asked, or at least you could visually identify what people were talking about. And I'll keep working on trying to find a way to do that. I'll report back to you at the next meeting, what ideas I might have about it. But and certainly if others have any, and I will ask the TMC also about that, if they have ideas about perhaps how some of these projects could be visited. Would have been great if we had video of the projects that would allow people to kind of do a flyover at the very least. And organizing them by community may be difficult as well, but I'll get back to you on that, because I know a number of people have asked about it. All right, next in line is Dale.
Okay, and just tongue in cheek while everybody's talking about being lawyers. As a CPA tax practitioner, I spent 50 years doing quasi legal work that I was not a lawyer, never has been. And so I'm not a lawyer, but I am a CPA. Yeah, with that said, I wanted to clarify with some of the comments about the numbers with the city of Tucson and the revenue coming in. And I want to make it clear that one, I'm not taking a position on this. I think there's clearly an understanding the city council or the city of Tucson is holding in their pocket their approval going forward on the RTA for potential, and they might propose a tax if they say no, because their plans for Proposition 11 deals with residential streets and some of their state tax money from the gas tax going to collector streets. And they have specifically not moved forward with funding anything that's on where we're talking about here. And I want to make that clear that 80% of Prop 411 goes into residential street repaving. As someone who sits on the oversight committee on Prop 401, the money that's there it's going to be a stretch, particularly with inflation, for the city getting to every street they promised to get to in just doing the residential repaving. And that 20% of that money will go to other safety improvements, including bicycles and sidewalks and other things. So I just don't want to have a misconception that any of the 411 money is intended for anything that we're talking about here.
Right.
And
I think Moss's point was simply that there was a project there that was somewhere in the middle of these other projects, and to know how they fit would be helpful. And
and I think that, well, I think they're, the safety improvements, if the city has plans to do safety improvements on Marianne Cleveland Way on the city section, I think we ought to know that. So I totally agree with you.
Good.
But I wanted to make that distinction.
Thank you. I have Kevin and Jamie, Brian and Mel on my list. Kevin?
All right. So I don't know if this is necessarily a controversial project, but I do question the wisdom of putting money that I think could go to other projects into it. But the Sonoran Corridor, it's designated as right of way only at $500,000.
No,
I remember correctly.
It's a
20 million. 20 million.
20 million.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
no.
okay, so $20 million regardless for a project that is, I was gonna say, I didn't think 500,000 was nearly enough, so. At least there's probably enough in there for it, but for a project that's what, over $1 billion to construct, which has no funding at this point. I just question basically putting a drop in the bucket where $20 million can go a long ways elsewhere in the region somewhere. So wanted to get the CAC's thoughts on that, and ultimately the TMC's thoughts on the wisdom of putting money into the smart corridor.
Okay, thank you. Next does anyone want to weigh in on that? I'm sure we'll hear comments about it. Jamie.
Not my comment. Yeah.
No.
So first of all, I want to address the thing with pedestrians. So I used to be on the Community Health Network committee, and we looked at, that was one of our priorities, was pedestrians. And what we found was they're not in the crosswalk. So
I can explain that too, if you want.
yeah, I know, but I mean, so it's kind of hard. I mean, the most recent one we had, last week, right? Not in a crosswalk. So you're kind of taking your life in your own hands if you're not in a crosswalk and things like that. So I would love to hear the explanation, but when I always thought that was called jaywalking, right? So the second thing is that kind of bothers me. It's been brought up a couple of times where City of Tucson has the bully pulpit because they're bringing in all 40% of the tax revenue or 50%. It's just not, that's somewhat disingenuous, because I'm a county resident, but where did I go to shop yesterday? I went to the City of Tucson, the Fries on Houghton. Where did I go to dinner yesterday? I went to a City of Tucson resident. Where have I bought my last couple of cars? In the City of Tucson. Where did I gas up? The City of Tucson. So there should be a regional, we shouldn't be worried about Tucson splitting apart. It's all interconnected. I drive through the City of Tucson every way because they did a little strip annexation in Vail. So probably the worst road in Tucson, by the way. But so I think we really need to stay away from that, because everybody's contributing. The funds might be coming from my pocket into this Tucson pocket and then back to the region, but I don't think we can think that way, because everybody in the county and Marana and Oro Valley contributes to the City of Tucson. So I think we need to kind of stop that discussion. As far as controversial, I think there's two things controversial. The bus route. I don't know how many people are going to go from the downtown, the Ronstadt Center, to the airport as an express route. I just don't know how many people are going to do that. Everybody I know, they have friends or family take them, or they Uber. And I've gone to a lot of multi-transport systems from, like, in Atlanta, LA, London, and every place was somewhat scary for a suburban person, right? So I think that might be controversial. The voters may have a problem with it. I think our biggest controversy, though, is when we look at our projects, and Josh, if you go to the congestion column, our number one goal, stated goal, was to manage and reduce congestion. And all of our projects are in the green, and almost all of them are in the green in 2045. When I go out and talk to the community, all different communities, right, all over the county, not just Vail, people want us to do something about congestion. And if we're going to propose a slate of projects that do nothing for congestion, are very limited, or the vast majority, we have failed as a committee. And this
beyond that, is there an educational issue that or an explanation as to why everything shows as currently not congested?
Yeah, so
even though people think it is.
Yeah. So I think if we don't do something about, that's what drives everybody crazy, is the congestion. I think Tucson is auto-centric. It's not New York. It's not downtown Chicago. There are people, I know it's probably better if we all lived in 20-story high-rises, but personally, I don't want to live that way. I want to live on an acre or 10 acres or 20 acres, and I will walk and I will bike to my local community as much as possible. but to say I have to live in a 20-story building, that's just not me. So I think we really need to look at this congestion issue, because if we do nothing about congestion and we think the voters are going to approve this, it's not going to happen. So.
If I may, I have a couple.
Well,
Thanks.
hang on, Moss, just a second. I wanted Abby to talk about the pedestrian real quick.
Yeah, I want to know that.
And then I have two follow-ups to to Jamie's other points. Thanks.
Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry, you didn't hear me. I'm gonna ask Abby to talk about the pedestrian question that came up at the beginning of Jamie's discussion.
Sounds good.
We'll get to you.
Lot to unpack there, Jamie, and I'm not gonna address all of it right now. In terms of pedestrians and where they cross, so my boyfriend's a city planner and actually made a map why we jaywalk across Broadway when we walk from his house to a bar. And it's because if you've ever tried to cross Swan and Broadway, you will die. If you go with the light. We have almost been hit by cars doing exactly what we're supposed to do a million times. If you jaywalk, you cross far less traffic and you have a safe median to stand on that you are absolutely not supposed to be on. So I raised this with the bike lanes before, and I think we should keep this in mind whenever we're talking about pedestrian infrastructure. People are drawing it like it's one of those gerbil routes, and they're not thinking about where people actually go. So think, would I send my 8-year-old to do this? Would I send my 8-year-old on a bike? Would I send my 8-year-old across this giant intersection where cars are flying through at 45 miles per hour? And at the point of the intersection, you have 3 through lanes on either side in 4 directions, plus a turn lane everywhere, plus people doing U-turns. No, you would not send your 8-year-old there. Hopefully not. Otherwise, I'm going to represent you and you're charged with felony child abuse.
Only if I was holding their hand.
And, you know, and other things we had, like, back to the Rattlesnake Bridge. I will never walk across that. I'm a woman. I will never walk across that as a pedestrian crossing. There's no way in or out. There's no way to see me. So people jaywalk because it's the safest place to go. People jaywalk because when it's really hot and you have to walk like a half a mile out of your way, you're not going to do it. Sometimes your bus stop is just across the other side. Something to keep in mind is that jaywalking was invented by the car industry in the 1920s. It didn't exist before people had the right of way. So if we want to think about pedestrian safety, we have to think about where pedestrians actually need to be, where they actually go. Grand Alvernon area where I live, a lot of people who are crossing back and forth to get to Circle K or wherever else. And that's just kind of where they are. And it's a long way out of the way. Sidewalks aren't necessarily safe either, because with all the strip malls, you have to drive in and out. There's like driveways in and out everywhere. So I think people do tend to make what are the smartest decisions for them. And the road accommodations aren't there. So you can have all the signals and all the most beautifully painted crosswalk you want. If it's at Broadway and Swan, it's much safer to not cross at the crosswalk. So think about an 8-year-old.
Yeah, thank you.
Frogger is better than lighted.
Can I add something to that?
Might very well be.
Go ahead, Dale.
The traffic engineer's got a problem then. So.
Jamie, I know there's yes, there's statistically a high rate of jaywalking involved in pedestrian. But I also like to point out there are, in fact, and I'll cite a particular case which got a lot of press at Broadway and Sarnoff. At the pedestrian crossing with a hawk signal on that pedestrian, we had 2 children killed this last year. And that is, and there are other cases of exactly the same thing. And so, yes, pedestrian safety is a hard enough nut to crack when you mix cars and people.
Well, and it's absolutely something that has the attention of all the jurisdictions, because it's not, although it happens statistically more where there are, wider roads perhaps, but also more people. It's epidemic throughout the country, but Tucson is certainly getting too close to the top of that list. Let's see, we have, Moss, were you adding on to Jamie, or what was your?
Yeah, I had some comments in response.
I still have several people that haven't had a chance to talk, so.
Can I, as part of the discussion, just make some quick points? First off, Abby, really wonderful comments. Second, to the conversation about how sales tax is collected, Jamie, when you're coming into the city of Tucson to buy your car, do all the, shop, go to restaurants, right? You're using Tucson infrastructure that the city is responsible for maintaining, both our roads, our grid, just like all of our services. If you got into a car accident, TPD would be responding. If there was a fire at the restaurant that you were eating at, Tucson Fire Department would respond. All of these things are funded by City of Tucson folks already that people who do not live in the city limit are not contributing. So I also want us to keep that in mind, and just because people are coming into the city and that's part of the tax revenue generation, it's also coming at the expense of City of Tucson taxpayers to support that use of our infrastructure, our regional infrastructure. And I think actually your point really makes clear why the map that we have that is concentrated in that central Tucson and everything, and those Tucson regions that are connectors to the region, right? Like it connects the north to the south, it connects the east to the west. And that's just because Tucson is the linchpin for our region as far as how we move and where we go, where tourists come to spend time and how they fly in. And I think that's a really important thing, that we are subsidizing infrastructure for other folks continuously. And then related to the guiding principles, our first goal is to manage and reduce congestion by using strategies and tools such as traffic demand management, intelligent transportation systems. We didn't say to widen roads. And so I think that when we're talking about that, we need to understand that it's not just looking at road lane changes on these projects. It's also about looking at what are the technologies, what are the strategies. As we were talking earlier, narrowing roads can actually, and improving infrastructure for other transit modes can alleviate congestion because people can mode switch, which is another one of our guiding principles. We also have about reducing crashes, and I think that we just heard a lot of great comments about that. And then first and foremost, too, providing safer, healthy, and efficient regional mobility. Well, we know that alternative transportation modes such as transit, bike, ped infrastructure are safer, reliable, and if it's planned well and healthy, and then also it's just more cost effective, right? It's so expensive to every few decades needing to widen roads just to facilitate more car travel. It's very ineffective cost wise, rather than having other options for people to get around. And then Karen, one comment quickly on that HTC and Jamie, because you brought it up as well, the high capacity transit, the BRT project that is going from the north to south. If you think about it, it goes right down Oracle, which connects Oro Valley and Marana, all down to the city to airport. So really it's actually a connector. And just because people do something different now doesn't mean they aren't going to switch to do it. Why would you pay for $30 at Tucson airport parking when you can just have somebody drop you off at the bus rapid transit stop and take you to the airport for maybe less than $5 round trip. So there's a lot of reasons why this could change the behavior of how people are moving. And I just wanted to note too, that the whole planning process around that project is equitable transit oriented development. So there's a lot of discussion about affordable housing along the corridor to ensure that that is being built. So it helps to mitigate displacement of marginalized populations. And there's been a huge public outreach effort already to try to address that. So I think LSA and Tucson and the city, it would be great to have maybe a presentation from them about how that displacement concern is being addressed through the in-depth public engagement process that's currently going on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Brian.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very
fine. Thank you. So now I need to start off with kind of another rebuttal to the the city subsidizing, county residents that if you come into the city using their infrastructure, there's no doubt that that's true. But at the same time, I think it is important to recognize that we have so much unincorporated area because jurisdictions do not annex into areas where they can't be profitable. So we have these large residential areas, or you have somewhere like Vail, which has not been incorporated before, because there is not the commercial investment in there. So a lot of these jurisdictions will only go as far as to where the sales tax is. And then the folks who live in the unincorporated areas are forced, or they don't have those same level of resources. So I think, again, we brought this up. I don't think it is appropriate to say who's got the deepest pockets at the table. The whole point of this plan is for it to be regional. It has been an extremely effective plan. It was approved by the voters, and the promises made, have been kept, and we've seen progress where a lot of individual bond projects in the past brought up by specific jurisdictions have not been as successful. So the regional approach does seem to be the best one, and it has worked thus far. So I would encourage us to stay on that. Going with that, I think putting projects throughout the region is the best way to get the voter sentiment. If we leave any particular areas out, or if we don't recognize the challenges in some of these areas, you do disenfranchise voters from wanting to support the overall plan. So a little bit for everyone is better than, one area getting everything or getting the majority of it. I think spreading it out is the best thing we can do for the region, as well as attracting the voters, which is why I do think, Vail not being, having some of these projects in there to go to a previous comment, is setting aside some money for the Sonoran corridor, which who knows when or if it could ever be funded. But setting that, money aside now, or would that money be better allocated to where real problems currently exist and are only going to get exacerbated and made worse? And I think we're looking at two different things here. A lot of these projects in the urban area, these are areas that have been neglected historically, which is why there is such an urgent need now to fix them. And then there are those areas where there is the suburban area, the urban sprawl, where we're trying to get ahead of those things with this next plan. And Vail and Marana are without a doubt the two fastest growing areas. And I have a lot of neighbors because I live in one of those areas. They do work in the city of Tucson. So these are very, very, very large employers within the city of Tucson, be it Caterpillar, be it Raytheon, be it wherever, where we do attract those employers, but for their own personal reasons, the employees choose to live on the outskirts of town. And so what I think is important is I don't believe it should be our intention to try to dictate or force behavior by molding a plan that would punish or discourage anyone from wanting to live further out from the main metro area. I think we should be predictive of where people are going, where people are living, where they are traveling to and why, and then make sure that we have a network that supports their travel in the most efficient and safest manner possible. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Brian. I'm sure today's not the last time that we'll have the chicken and egg debate about growth. I have Mel and then Joanne, and then I'll ask if anyone who hasn't spoken today wants to add something before we wrap up today's meeting.
I would
go ahead.
I would like to add an agenda item for the city's presentation on their transit plan. And I'd like an in-depth understanding of what, if any, planning is going into connect the future growth areas with transit.
Good. Mel, I know you're a member of the transit subcommittee, and shortly after the first of the year, we're going to get that back together, and the presentation you're asking about is one of the first items I think on Carolyn's.
Okay, but my objection is that the last presentation was void of any content.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a background meeting for sure. But we're on top of it. Sure. Oh, I was just voicing it for everyone in the room who looked at me like I was crazy. Anything else, Mel?
Nope. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne?
I wanted to address the issue we talked about earlier. I guess I have to start with the disclosure that I am not an attorney. I am not a CPA. I am an enrolled agent. I am also used to be an avid bicyclist here in Tucson, and I would state that I think what's going on with pedestrian and bicycle safety is truly a matter of not if you are struck by a vehicle, but when you are struck by a vehicle. And is this something that this committee should make part of our outward outreach? Yes, I did say outward outreach. I got it.
I had been focused on my inward outreach plan, so I don't know what to say, but no, good, very good point. And we have to keep our eye on that. That is obviously one of our guiding principles.
And
Okay,
Tom, at least I did not say doo-doo.
Thanks for that.
When did you do it though?
So I have a comment from Michael is the last one that I see on the board, unless anyone here hasn't spoken.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I just wanted to make some comments because some ideas and feelings came to me as we've been discussing all types of things. First thing I'd just like to say, in regards to a congestion solution, I'd just like to say public transportation. That's where my heart and my head is. So please, let's not ignore that. And also, people of no income and low income cannot afford Ubers. There was a comment made about Ubers and driving, and that's fine. But please don't ignore the people who can't afford an Uber. And my last comment would be in regards to Tucson Norte Sur. That project, the plan for that project is to run not just from downtown to the airport, is to run at this moment from Tucson Mall to the airport. Those are the plans. However, I'm under the understanding that either Oro Valley and or Oracle now have some interest in participating in Tucson Norte Sur. So this particular project could be beneficial to much more than just Tucson. And thank you for the time.
Great, good points. Thank you. All right. I don't remember. Do we have agenda items? I've gotten quite a few of them on my note sheet here today, but are there any other agenda items? Abby? Yeah, we did have a conversation about it and discussion at in a previous meeting. I think it might have been in September. But I think we've heard more about it, and I think Josh will help us when we get a little more detail about the modeling that'll be done later, and how induced demand is covered or not covered in that software. Yeah.
You talked about creating like a repository of resources for all of us to access that can also be public access on the website, where we can put like articles like that New York Times article that I referenced with the carbon dioxide emissions maps and things like that. And or know if people have done home videos of where the projects are, we could put that up on there.
Great, thank you. Moss, you have an item?
I have kind of two questions. One, could we hear what the plan is based on all this feedback? Like, are we, of today, are we gonna get a different list? How, of projects given this input? I don't know, I guess I'm asking for a little bit of closure on that last item of like, where are we landing and how is that whole discussion getting synthesized? So
Well,
that's one.
Yeah, there's a number of issues that come up today that I will be talking to, and staff will be assisting with the TMC, so that we have that additional feedback provided, some presentations to be scheduled and to be emailed out to us, and then continued review of the projects with the questions that Paki posed today, and that we spent better part of 2 hours talking about, and continue to do that until we've answered those questions in the form of a plan that is a list of projects to forward to the board.
Is there like a way that, because I think some people had really specific ads that they wanted to see, and or like I said, the projects that were removed from the CAC priority. I think Mary mentioned a few that didn't cut it. Jamie had that one project over that would help with water and monsoon access. It would be really helpful to hear or to see that list, so that when we can just be oriented clearly during those next conversations. Okay. And then I was wondering, you said you had a list of agenda items. Could you read those to us just so that we can, as a group, hear what they are and make sure that nothing we had in mind was missed, or might spur other ideas?
Say again?
Could you let us know what the agenda items that you had recorded from this meeting? I think that would just help us know if there's something else that we meant to request or wanted clarification on.
Yeah, information back from the TMC, as well as additional presentations from jurisdictions regarding the so-called, I call it the donut hole that was brought up, that's in the unincorporated area near Marana and Oro Valley. The priorities that the city and county have down in the Vail area, including Corona de Tucson, Marianne Cleveland, Colossal Cave. We will also ask for some information back about State Route 210, which was shown, at least by some comments here, as being too expensive, or the thought that there shouldn't be any or very few ADOT projects. We'll get feedback from TMC about that as well. Looking to see if we can provide some method for interested CAC members to visit projects with some guide alongside, and the bus rapid transit questions that were brought up, and kind of opposing sides made some comments about, or if not opposing, at least issues of potential mitigation that would be needed. And then voting patterns. We need to get some information that staff will provide to us, and some more information about commuter patterns and traffic movements throughout the region. And I've got another sheet here of some other stuff, but I'm afraid it's going to take more than this next meeting probably to get through all of those. Yeah, staff gets an extra week this time. Diane.
Thank you, Chair McGovern. I see that list is quite long, but I'm wondering if it is too late in the process to invite a representative from the Pima County Pima County Department of Environmental Quality to speak to us about some of the work they've been doing.
And specifically, what would we be asking them to tell us about?
Specifically, they've had a campaign encouraging alternative transportation and other alternatives to the car. And so they may have statistics or just a way to put that in our planning toolbox.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'll refer that to the transit subcommittee. Okay, everyone, we're closing down our meeting at this time, and I want to thank you all for spending all this time with us. And I want to wish everyone happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Hanukkah for those who are, or whatever your celebration of this holiday season is. Wish the best for you all. And our next meeting will be on January 9th. I want to remind everyone that we have a federal holiday on the first Monday and on the third Monday of January. And so we're moving to the second and fourth for that month only. And the second meeting, we'll have a start time of 3 p.m. and will be held to no more than 2 hours. Too late. Everybody's already